Hi, good morning. Let me just pray before we get into the word today. Father God, we just thank you again for this time that we have to come together as a body of believers, to meet, to worship, to study your word. And as Alex said, Lord, we just pray for those people who aren't here today, maybe they're travelling. We just ask that you would keep them safe. For those who are under the weather, for the sickness, just pray that you'd be granting them some relief at this time. And for us here, Lord, just be with us now. Guide us into your word, guide us into truth. May my words today be clear. May your spirit just be at work in this place and just touching upon our hearts, moving us as we need to be moved, Lord. In your name we pray. Amen. Well, good morning. Let's get straight into the passage. We're in Matthew chapter 15 and we're starting from verse 21 today. And we'll do a little bit of a recap of what we looked at last week as well, because it's going to be important just for the context of what we're looking at. If you have your Bibles, Matthew chapter 15, verses 21 onwards, but it will be on the screen at the same time. So let me read this. It's kind of a challenging passage. There's a few things in here where perhaps Jesus acts in a way that we might not initially expect. If you've grown up in church and you kind of, you've heard about Jesus and the way that he treats people, there's going to be a few things in this passage today where you think, oh, that isn't really what I expected him to do. And we're going to talk about why that is. So verse 21. And Jesus went away from there and withdrew to the district of Tyre and Sidon. And behold, a Canaanite woman from that region came out and was crying, "Have mercy on me, O Lord, Son of David. My daughter is severely oppressed by a demon." But he did not answer her a word. And his disciples came and begged him, saying, "Send her away, for she is crying out after us." He answered, "I was sent only to the lost sheep of the house of Israel." But she came and knelt before him, saying, "Lord, help me." And he answered, "It is not right to take the children's bread and throw it to the dogs." She said, "Yes, Lord, yet even the dogs eat the crumbs that fall from their master's table." Then Jesus answered her, "O woman, great is your faith. Be it done for you as you desire." And her daughter was healed instantly. So, like I said, there's a few interesting things in there. He kind of refers to her as a dog. He doesn't answer her. He's silent towards her. Jesus, this seems unusual. If you're, again, like I said, if you've kind of grown up in Christian circles, going to church, this is not how you would necessarily anticipate Jesus reacting in this scenario. And it's going to open up, hopefully today as we go through this passage, we're going to try and find some application for ourselves, obviously, but there's also kind of a grand kind of scheme that's going on of the arc of the Bible narrative, like what is going on here? Why is Jesus talking to this woman in this way? And it's important that we remember some of the things that we looked at last week. So if you remember, if you were here, the previous passage, we were looking at how Jesus was dealing with the Pharisees. The Pharisees had come from Jerusalem to meet with Jesus, and their whole attitude towards him was one that was very critical. They were trying to find fault in what the disciples were doing. And actually the question that the Pharisees had for Jesus is, why do your disciples not wash their hands as the tradition of the elders has been? And the message and the response that Jesus gave, and what we tried to look at last week, was this idea and this concept that it's not this external washing of hands that makes you clean. That's what the Pharisees were kind of preaching and teaching, that this was all about a ritual approach to become ceremonially clean. Jesus was saying, no, it's not about that. It's about the inside. It's about the heart. It's the heart that makes you unclean. Out of the heart comes all of these murderous thoughts, adultery, and so on. It's that makes you unclean. It's that defiles you. And so when we get into this situation here, what we just read this morning, we're going to see a real test of that. Jesus has just told the Pharisees, it's not about the external, it's about the internal, it's about your heart and where your true faith really lies. Jesus criticized the Pharisees, saying, "You honor me with your lips, but your hearts are far from me." And so when we get to this section, we have moved, so in that first verse 21 and 22, it says, Jesus went away from there and withdrew to the district of Tyre and Sidon. So we can just come back a few verses, or that's it, yeah. Jesus has been with the Pharisees in a very Jewish region, just outside Lake Galilee. I don't know if this is going to be massively clear for you to see, but the blue splodge of water, that's the Sea of Galilee. Where we'd been last week was just in the northwest corner of that. That area is a Jewish region. And what's happening now, I don't know if you can see it, but up where that the red dot is, this is kind of the region of Tyre and Sidon, up in this area. And this was predominantly a Gentile region. So Jesus has moved from a very predominantly Jewish region to one that is now a very Gentile region. And for us, when we're reading this, when I read this for the first time, I heard, oh, he's gone to Tyre and Sidon. I just saw this as just a description of a physical place that he was going to. Oh, I'm going into the woodlands, or I'm going to Spring, or whatever. Well, that is true. This is a place that exists, and it's a real place that Jesus went to. But we perhaps miss the kind of the impact that this would have had on the original readers of this. Imagine, maybe the equivalent might be if I said, I'm planning a trip with some friends, and I'm going to Vegas for the weekend. That might conjure up some ideas about, well, what kind of trip is this going to be? If I'm going to Vegas, you know what Vegas is like. Or if we talk about Hollywood or somewhere like that, we immediately, ideas come into our mind about those kind of places that stereotypically, traditionally, maybe are not exactly the most godly places, sinful places, things where you wouldn't anticipate people to be favourable towards the message of Jesus. And that is really what is going on. When Jesus goes to Tyre and Sidon, the people who read that and saw Jesus doing that, immediately that's going to ring and resonate with them that this is an ungodly region that Jesus is going to. Just to kind of make that abundantly clear, in Matthew 11, verse 21, so a little bit before this, Jesus is being critical of the Jewish regions for not accepting his message. And in Matthew 11:21, he says, "For if the mighty works done in you had been done in Tyre and Sidon, they would have repented long ago in sackcloth and ashes." Which was a condemnation on them. He's saying, even Tyre and Sidon would have repented of this. This region that you know is ungodly, if these miracles had been done here, they would have repented, but you haven't. It was synonymous, Tyre and Sidon was kind of synonymous with an ungodly place, shorthand for that. I don't have any verses for this, but if you read Ezekiel chapter 26 through to 28, there's 3 chapters that are dedicated towards the judgment and the sin of Tyre and Sidon. And these cities were destroyed about 300 years before Jesus was there. So, it's not like that was up to date to this moment, but just to the Jewish readers, they knew these were cities that had been talked about in the Old Testament as ungodly regions where God's judgment was. This was not a place that you would necessarily expect the Messiah to show up. On top of that, so Jesus is moving from this Jewish region into a Gentile region. The person who comes out to meet him, in verse 22 it says, "And behold, a Canaanite woman comes out." The Canaanites were the traditional enemies of the Jewish people. They were the historical enemy of God. They were non-Jewish. They were pagan people. And as readers, readers or people seeing this, immediately they're going to be thinking, well, how is Jesus going to deal with this? I'm sure the disciples, as they were traveling this direction, as they're heading up towards Tyre and Sidon from the Sea of Galilee, they've been upset about potentially upsetting the Pharisees. Now they're in this hostile region, and a Canaanite woman has come out to them. And I'm sure they have their preconceptions over what is going on here. This is not a godly region. This is not a godly woman who's coming out. But we're going to see a few examples here. We're going to be able to look at the woman's example to us. We're going to be able to look at Jesus' example to us as well. So that's hopefully a little bit of context, which I think is helpful to understanding this passage and helps us understand why Jesus responds the way he does. But let's get into the woman and her approach. So my first point here, I've just said the woman's humble faith in verse 22. So maybe just take it back a slide or two maybe, where it's verse 22. And this is how the woman approaches Jesus. She says, "Have mercy on me, O Lord, Son of David. My daughter is severely oppressed by a demon." There's quite a lot that we can glean just from this very short sentence, the way that she approaches Jesus. And we can compare this and contrast it a little bit with the Pharisees. The Pharisees have come, the Pharisees were coming to be critical. They were saying, "Why do you not wash your hands as we've been teaching you?" They'd come with their puffed up ideas, their knowledge of the law. But this woman, she comes and she is completely humble. She is coming and she's asking for mercy. And she's coming and she's referring to Jesus as her Lord. Not like what the Pharisees were doing. The Pharisees were coming thinking that they knew better, thinking that Jesus was doing it wrong, that they knew the right way to do it. But this woman, she comes, she's humble, she's asking for mercy. She knew that she was undeserving to be there. Secondly, she knows who Jesus is. She refers to him as the Son of David. This is a messianic title that, again, would have been very familiar to the Jews. They knew that that was a phrase, a terminology that was used for the Messiah, the promised one who was to come. The one that the Jews and the Pharisees supposedly were waiting for. This is, for them, everything that they're teaching is supposed to be building up to, when will the Messiah come? When will the promised one come to save our people? But the Pharisees don't recognize Jesus for who he is. They think he's a troublemaker. But this woman comes and she knows exactly who she is. Even though she's traditionally an enemy of God in this hostile region, she refers to Jesus as the Son of David. And ultimately, she has faith in Jesus. And you can see that she has faith in his power to heal, because she goes to him and she's bringing her severely oppressed, demon-possessed daughter to him. If we just go back, just on that slide where that map is, again, I just think this was quite interesting. So Tyre and Sidon was known as a place where there was, Baal worship, and actually where that red dot is, this is modern day Lebanon. This is, this is off Google Maps. I took a screenshot yesterday. That kind of region up there. So that red dot, if you can't read it, actually says the Temple of Eshmun, and this was a god that they believed in at the time, which was a god of healing. And I'm sure that this Canaanite woman would have been very aware of this. This is just a few miles away from Sidon. The city or the town just below that is Sidon. A little bit further down the coast is Tyre. Okay, that whole strip is that region of Tyre and Sidon. She would have known about this god that was in that region, the Temple of Eshmun, which was a god of healing. But she decided to go to Jesus instead. She didn't listen to the world around her. She wasn't influenced by the culture that was there. She knew that Jesus was the real deal. She saw him as the Messiah, the Son of David, and she went to him to find healing. So I think there's a few things already that we can just take from her example. And we talked about this a little bit last week, I guess, but the first thing I would say is that clearly your kind of religious upbringing, your background, your knowledge of the Bible, your knowledge of how Christianity looks or the way that you should act isn't what makes you right before God. The Pharisees had that down to a T. They knew all the laws, they knew all the rules, they knew how to act. They were well respected within their communities. This woman, on the other hand, was the complete opposite of that. She hadn't been brought up in that culture. She was not familiar with those things, presumably. But that isn't what counts in front of God. This woman with a pagan background, she showed more faith in that one sentence where she came and asked for mercy from the Son of David. She showed more faith in that one sentence than the Pharisees showed throughout the whole gospel, throughout all the gospels. They're just there to critique, to point the finger, to break down, to destroy. So firstly, we see already that kind of religiousness that we might have, our upbringing, that doesn't really count. That isn't the thing that matters. What we see is that what we need to do as we approach Jesus is we need to be humble. We need to recognize that Jesus is the one that we need to go to. We need to recognize that we are unworthy. She goes and she just cries out for mercy. And that is what the Christian message is. That is the gospel when we look at it, is that we are unworthy, we need mercy, and we need to go to Jesus for that. And that is exactly what this woman does. And then thirdly, just on this point, I think a good reminder for us is that it shows that true faith can be seen anywhere, even in the dark places. So this place where the disciples would have been going to, and immediately would have thought, well, there's nothing good that's going to come from this region. This is not a faith-filled place. Actually, we see that there is a faith-filled woman there. There is more faith in that woman there than in the Jewish regions that Jesus has been. And the disciples don't really get a say in that. This woman comes out, she's a believer. They might not have been expecting it, but that is now who they're kind of associated with. And I was just thinking about kind of ourselves. We're obviously a small body here, a small group of people. We don't really get to choose who we mix with. Okay, like it or lump it, whatever. We don't really get those choices. This is who, at this moment in time, if you find yourself here, this is who the Lord has brought into our vicinity. This is our family as a church, as Meadowlake. This is the people that God has brought into our lives. And so that's going to sometimes obviously bring its own challenges. We'll have our different backgrounds and so on. But we are here. This is the church that God has brought together. We don't necessarily get to pick the people that we want. I guess the problem that can sometimes happen with so many churches in this area and so many big churches is that actually you can get into the habit of picking and choosing. Like, this doesn't work out quite well for me. I'll try somewhere else. And there's maybe sometimes good reason to do that. I know when I first moved to the US, I went to a church that had 60,000 members, they said. I didn't meet all of them, obviously. But that was great. I was part of a small group, which was people about my age, kind of single, and that was good for me to build community. But even then, I remember feeling like I'm missing out on some diversity here. I've not got people who are older, who are wiser, people who are from different backgrounds. That is one of the things that is the beauty of the church, is that we bring together a diverse group of people that we perhaps don't expect, people that we maybe wouldn't necessarily interact with outside of this kind of setting, because our work is just a different culture, a different environment. That's something that the church does, and that's something that the disciples experienced here. Is this woman who they wouldn't expect coming out of this ungodly region shows faith. Okay, so the woman's humble faith, we see that in verse 22. Verses 23 to 24, we get a response that we might not expect. Jesus is silent. Let me just read those verses again. So she's just come asking for mercy. Verse 23. But he did not answer her a word. And his disciples came and begged him, saying, "Send her away, for she is crying out after us." He answered, "I was sent only to the lost sheep of the house of Israel." If you've not come across this passage before, I think this is a surprising reaction. I think everywhere else that we've seen, when people come to Jesus and they're asking for healing, Jesus is very free to give that. And we've seen that even with Gentiles before. It's not, we're going to talk about kind of the Jewish people and the Gentiles, but he's healed Gentiles before. Even back in Matthew 4, verses 24 to 25, and I think I have the verses up here. It says this: "So his fame spread throughout all Syria, and they brought him all the sick, those afflicted with various diseases and pains, those oppressed by demons, epileptics and paralytics, and he healed them. And great crowds followed him from Galilee and the Decapolis," which was a Gentile region, "and from Jerusalem and Judea and from beyond the Jordan." There's already been cases before where Jesus has come across Gentiles, they've come to him in their flocks and their crowds, and Jesus has very happily healed them indiscriminately. The centurion, if you remember, the centurion who came to Jesus saying that his daughter was sick and needed to be healed, Jesus healed them from afar. So what is going on here? Why is Jesus silent in this case? Why does he respond with this answer, which was, "I was sent only to the lost sheep of the house of Israel"? Okay, so I think there's two things that are going on here. So I think there's a big salvation, the arc, the narrative of the Bible that we're seeing starting to be bridged from the Old Testament into the New Testament. So the Old Testament, we're seeing how God covenants with his people, that God has made a covenant with the Jewish nation, that is how he's going to interact with the world and with mankind. Fast forward to today, and we're comfortable with the idea that this is a gospel message that is for all. Everyone is welcome, all nations, all tribes, all tongues. There's this kind of in-between transition bit. Okay, the door was always open for non-Jewish people. You read the Old Testament, there's always ways made for non-Jewish people to come into being a person of God, a Christian. Obviously didn't use that term at the time. But there is a distinction and a difference. It was initially for the Jewish people, that was the focus. And we're transitioning into this time where it's opening up. And at this moment where Jesus is speaking, he is saying that time has not yet come for that transition. He says, I was sent only to the lost sheep of the house of Israel. That's the Jewish people. He was saying that he's come to bring a message to the Jews first, and then it will go to the Gentiles afterwards. There was an order to the way that this was going to be done. And this is consistent with what we've seen before, the way that Jesus has spoke to his disciples. So in Matthew 10, verses 5 to 7, and I think that'll be on the screen as well, Jesus is sending out his disciples, and he says, it says, these 12 Jesus sent out, instructing them, go nowhere among the Gentiles and enter no town of the Samaritans, but go rather to the lost sheep of Israel and proclaim as you go, saying the kingdom of heaven is at hand. The idea when Jesus came for his ministry, it was first and foremost to the Jewish people. But even just a few verses after that, we see that there is going to be a provision for the Gentiles. So in Matthew 10:18, Jesus is speaking and he says, you'll be dragged before governors and kings for my sake, to bear witness before them and the Gentiles. Okay, there will be a witness to the Gentiles. And then later on, as Jesus is ascending into heaven, Matthew 28:19, the message to the disciples at that point, rather than only go to the house of Israel, no, he's saying, go therefore and make disciples of all nations. And in Acts 1:8, you'll be my witnesses in Jerusalem and in all Judea and Samaria and to the end of the earth. So we are as we're here in Matthew 15, we are transitioning from that time of the Jewish people going out to then all of the Gentiles, and we're seeing how the Old and the New Testament are starting to mesh together. So there's a big lesson here in terms of the salvation history, but I think also, secondly, why does Jesus answer in this way? Why is he silent? Why does he not heal straight away? It's giving the woman an opportunity to demonstrate her faith. I've talked about this before. I used to be a teacher. Some of us are still teachers in here. And one of the things that you can do as a teacher, I was a maths teacher, you don't always immediately want to give the right answer straight away. So if you're dealing with a concept with a student, you might ask them a question, they're dealing with a problem that they're trying to work through. They might start to answer that, and as a teacher, you don't want to, if they start to answer either correctly or incorrectly, you don't necessarily want to just jump in straight away and tell them it's right or tell them it's wrong. You want to give them an opportunity to kind of think through and process what's going on. You give them a little bit more thinking time. I've had it before as well, where you're in a class and you ask a question, whatever it is, and immediately people just start throwing out answers and they start guessing numbers. Sometimes they get it right, okay? Sometimes they shout at you and you're like, oh, yeah, that's right, but why? You need to think through it. And it's you see a little bit of that going on here, that from the outside looking in, we're seeing this woman come to Jesus and we want to know, okay, is she just throwing out numbers? Is she just trying everything she can? Maybe she's been to the temple of Eshmun, she tried that, it didn't work. Okay, let me try out. There's this other guy called Jesus who I've heard about. Let me go see if that works. Let me go see him quickly, ask for some help. If that doesn't work, I'll move on to the next one. Is she just bouncing around from one place to the other, trying things out? Or does she have real, genuine faith? And the way that we know that she has genuine faith is because Jesus doesn't answer her right away. And this woman, when she doesn't get the response that perhaps she initially wants, she doesn't just disappear. She doesn't give up. She knows that Jesus is the answer. She demonstrates her faith by the fact that we're going to see that she is persistent, that she keeps going. And as readers, or as the disciples who are there observing this, they get to see that themselves as well. They get to see that this woman from an unclean region, from a Gentile nation, they get to see, oh no, she is showing genuine faith. Jesus talked about it's not about the external, it's not about the washing of hands, it's about the heart, and we are getting to see that play out. She is a lesson to us about what really matters when you're approaching God. And we see a persistence whose the disciples say to Jesus, send her away, for she's crying out after us. She's pestering them. She's not giving up. That send her away isn't necessarily, Jesus, can you just get rid of her? There's a sense in which they're asking, Jesus, can you heal her so that she can go? Or heal her daughter so that she can go. It's not completely dismissive. But Jesus is silent, but she pushes in even more. And so although I think the main message of this passage that we're looking at is about the message of the gospel opening up to non-Jewish people, I think we can learn some lessons from the woman's approach. And my question would be, okay, well, one thing I thought about is, well, how do I react? When God feels silent, if I'm praying for something, if I'm desiring something in my life and God just feels silent, well, what is my reaction to that? I think for me, sometimes I have a tendency maybe just to, all right, I'll try that, I'm going to throw that out, say a quick prayer, doesn't seem to be working, all right, let me try something else, let me do this, let me try these different areas. Whereas what this woman does, she knows that Jesus is the answer. So when Jesus is silent, she doesn't just give up and go somewhere else, she pushes in further. She demonstrates her faith by going further into her faith. So let's look at what that looks like. So my third point is the woman's godly persistence. So she's had this silence that's come. Jesus is kind of explaining that he's coming to the Jewish nation first, but the woman does not give up. So verses 25 to 28. But she came and knelt before him, saying, Lord, help me. And he answered, it is not right to take the children's bread and throw it to the dogs. She said, yes, Lord, yet even the dogs eat the crumbs that fall from their master's table. Then Jesus answered her, O woman, great is your faith, be it done for you as you desire. And her daughter was healed instantly. So we're still not quite at that point where we're getting the response that we might expect from Jesus. His next response, so the woman, 3 times she's gone to him asking for healing, asking for mercy. And this time he answers, it's not right to take the children's bread and throw it to the dogs. Now what this is referring to is, at that time, the Jewish people might refer to the Gentiles as dogs, as scavengers. Very much a derogatory term used at that time. The Jewish people were the children of God. They were saying the Gentiles are scavengers. They are dogs. Now, there is, the few of the things that I was reading was kind of saying, as Jesus responds and kind of refers to them as dogs, the word that he uses is a little bit softer, it's a little bit gentler. It's almost like the term little dog, which might be more like a pet, for example. So it's maybe not as derogatory, but however, there's still this sense that Jesus is saying, there's the children of Israel, and you are like a pet dog. There's still that distinction between being a child of God and being the pet dog in your house. But the woman's response, even to that, she says, yes, Lord, yet even, and perhaps even a better translation would be, for even, yes, Lord, for even the dogs eat the crumbs. What she does, rather than trying to counter what God is saying, counter what Jesus is saying, plead her case like, I'm not a dog, she actually says, yes, I am a dog, but Jesus, you are a good God. Even your pet dog you feed twice a day. You take for walks. You let out into the backyard to go to the bathroom. You still care for that pet dog. She says, yes, Lord, yet even the dogs eat the crumbs that fall from the master's table. She knows the character of God, and she makes the case. She doesn't try to build herself up. She doesn't say that, hey, I'm better than that, I'm better than the dog, you should look favourably on me because I'm a better person than that, I'm better than the other Gentiles. No, she says, no, that is fine, that is who I am. I know you have a responsibility to go to the children of God first, to go to the Israelites first. But you are a good God, you are a loving God, a loving Messiah, and you will still feed. You're calling me a little dog, you will still feed that little dog because you are a good God. She understood that this message was going beyond the Jewish people. She had a better understanding than the Pharisees had shown. So she is persistent in her approach, but she doesn't appeal to her own worthiness for why she should receive blessing and receive mercy. She appeals to the character of God. So I guess the distinction would be, if you're going for a job interview or something like that, you draft up your resume, you go to the interview, you're trying to make a case for, hey, I'm really good, you should employ me because I'm going to bring some benefit to you. That is not what she's doing here, and that is not what we do when we go to God. When we go to God, we're not saying, hey God, this is why you should accept me, for all these reasons, all these things that I do. Actually, it's God, there's nothing that I can do. There is nothing worthy about me, but you are a good God, and you have promised me forgiveness, and you have promised me redemption. And the response to that, so Jesus, the woman has had the opportunity now 3 times to show her faith, to show her persistence, and the response is, O woman, great is your faith, be it done for you as you desire. And her daughter was healed instantly. So her faith was found in this unexpected place. And I think it's interesting. We are going to just briefly, after this, we're going to read just a couple more sections after this, just to kind of give a little bit more context. We're not going to go into all the depth of the next kind of 10 verses. But what we're going to see is, Jesus has gone from this Jewish region up to Tyre and Sidon, and then straight away he's going to return back to the Sea of Galilee. He made his way all the way to the Tyre and Sidon, which I did write it down, I can't remember, I think it was like 50 miles away, something like that. He has gone there just for this one woman. There's no other account that goes on in Tyre and Sidon. He goes up there, he has this interaction with this Canaanite woman, and he returns to the Sea of Galilee. And what we see is that, yes, the message is going to the Jews first, but it is coming to the Gentiles in this, and it's not about these outward actions, this outward work. It is about true faith. The faith that seeks mercy is honoured. So for me and for you, what can we look at here? If you ever have times where you're feeling unworthy, you're feeling down, maybe there's sin in your life, there's things that you're struggling with, just remember, like this woman, you're not depending on yourself. You're not depending on your own self-worth. You're relying on God, and God is steadfast. That never changes. He is the constant, he is consistent, and he loves you not because you are lovable. You might have heard that said before, but because he is a loving God. It is because of him that we have confidence in our salvation. So I am going to basically finish there, but I think for context, I just want to read a little bit more. This won't take too long. I kind of just want to try and show you why I'm convinced that the reason that Jesus responds in this way is because he is teaching a lesson about going from the Jewish people to the Gentiles. So I'm just going to read a few more verses because I want to show you the context of what goes on after this. So verses 29 to 31. So remember where he was up in Tyre and Sidon. Verse 29, after he's just healed the Canaanite's daughter. Verse 29. Jesus went on from there and walked beside the Sea of Galilee. And he went up on the mountain and sat down there. And great crowds came to him, bringing with them the lame, the blind, the crippled, the mute, and many others. And when they put him at his feet and he healed them, so that the crowd wondered, when they saw the mute speaking, the crippled healthy, the lame walking, and the blind seeing, they glorified the God of Israel. This was, we read in Mark, that this region that he's gone to is called the Decapolis. We kind of heard that mentioned before. It's in the southeastern region, just off the Sea of Galilee on that coast. And that again was a Gentile region. So Jesus has moved now into a Gentile region, and unlike with the woman, where there was kind of a lesson to be learned, now he is healing them left, right, and centre. It is clear now that he'd gone to the Jewish people, he's now with the Gentiles, and he is healing them. And we see there that the result of that is that they glorified the God of Israel. Okay, this is not their God, they are Gentiles. They are glorifying the God of Israel. Just after that, okay, I'm just going to read 8 more verses, verses 32 to 39. So he's with these crowds of people, and Jesus called his disciples to him and said, I have compassion on the crowd, because they have been with me now 3 days and have nothing to eat. And I am unwilling to send them away, hungry, lest they faint on the way. And the disciples said to him, where are we to get enough bread in such a desolate place to feed so great a crowd? And Jesus said to them, how many loaves do you have? They said, 7 and a few small fish. And directing the crowd to sit down on the ground, he took the 7 loaves and the fish, and having given thanks, he broke them and gave them to the disciples. And the disciples gave them to the crowds. And they all ate and were satisfied. And they took up 7 baskets full of the broken pieces left over. Those who ate were 4,000 men, besides women and children. And after sending away the crowds, he got into the boat and went to the region of Mackrell. Okay, does that sound familiar at all? Wes, a couple of weeks ago, spoke on the feeding of the 5,000. Now we've got the feeding of the 4,000. Well, what's going on here? Did Matthew forget as he was writing this? Was he like, oh yeah, let's put this one in again. This is good. I really like that one where he got to feed everyone. No, this is a second occasion. Okay, there's different number of people. There's different bread. There's different fish. This is a separate miracle. Well, why include this? Because often when you think about this, we kind of think about, oh, this shows Jesus' power, it shows his compassion, it shows his provision. All 100% true. So why repeat it? Why do the miracle again? Why include it in Matthew again? And the reason is that now Jesus, before was in a Jewish region, feeding the Jewish people. Now he's repeating the miracle and he's amongst the Gentiles. And he's showing, in doing so, we're seeing again that, this is a message that is open to all. Yes, it was to go to the Jews first, but the time for the Gentiles is now starting to open. So I thought that was really cool to see that Jesus' geography is moving, and where he is actually very significant. And we might miss that because, I don't know about you, but my geography of the Middle East is not necessarily fantastic, and the history of it, but we can see just by where Jesus is and where he's performing the miracles that he is teaching us something. So just to finish, I just want to maybe run through some main applications from this, because I found it quite difficult, quite challenging because of this kind of big narrative that's happening. But first of all, it's genuine faith that matters. We see that in the woman. It's the faith that saved her. And that means that the gospel goes to everyone, to all nations, all tribes. In Revelation 7:9, when we look at the end of time, we read this. After this I looked, and behold, a great multitude that no one could number, from every nation, from all tribes and peoples and languages, standing before the throne and before the Lamb. If you're a believer, you will find yourself in heaven one day, and you're going to look around, and there's going to be people from all over the world. People that maybe you didn't even expect. People from different backgrounds to you. Because no one is outside the possibility of God's grace. That's what we see in the woman. She was not outside of the scope of God's grace. That's what the Jewish people thought. They're like, this isn't for the Gentiles. but we see that, no, this is a message for everyone. So that applies to me and to you, and it also applies to our friends and people that we can take this message to. We see that big picture, we see the example of Jesus. Jesus went out of his way, he went all the way to this Gentile region for the sake of that woman. He was prepared to step into places where he perhaps wasn't going to be welcome, or where you might think he's not going to be welcome. That's an example to us. We are to go to places where we might think there's no hope. We might think, well, that isn't an area, that isn't a person who's going to accept the message. But we are to go and to take the message. And finally, the example of the woman. She came with humility. She had, maybe it was a basic understanding, but she knew who Jesus was, and that was key. And maybe most importantly, she knew the character of God, and she trusted him. And because of that, she was persistent in seeking Jesus. She didn't give up. She lent into her faith. She persisted, she continued, and she chased after him, and that's what we should do too. Let me pray, and then we'll come around the Lord's table. So Father God, we just thank you again for your word and for the lessons that can be learned. I just ask that this morning that just as we look at that story, we'll be amazed at just the way that you've pieced things together, for the way that you have brought salvation to the world, that this is open to every single one of us. It doesn't matter about our background or our upbringing or anything like that. It is just about our faith in you. We are dependent on you and your character, Lord. So I just ask that this morning that we'd be able to reflect on that we'd just be reminded of your goodness, of your steadfastness, and that we would feel secure because of that. We ask these things in your name. Amen. So we're going to gather around the Lord's table in just a moment. So we'll just have a couple of minutes just to reflect, read through the passage again, see if there's anything else in there that kind of speaks to you, kind of hits with you.